25,000 years ago, deep in the Ice Age, someone carved a small statue of a woman and made her unmistakably, dramatically fat. Heavy belly, full hips, every curve deliberate. And they weren't alone. All across ancient Europe, hunter-gatherers kept carving fat women into stone and ivory again and again for 20,000 years. We call them the Venus figurines. Here's what should stop you. As far as we can tell, almost nobody in their world was fat. Their lives made it nearly impossible. So how did they even know what to carve? You can't sculpt something you've never seen, and yet someone across thousands of miles and hundreds of generations knew exactly what a heavy human body looked like, well enough to carve it over and over in a world where it should barely have existed. That paradox is the key to the whole thing, and cracking it open reveals one of the most misunderstood truths about your own body. So let's ask it honestly. Did ancient humans get fat? And if not, how did they carve what they'd never seen? And why do we get fat when they couldn't? Hold the statues in your mind. We'll come back to them, because first you have to understand what daily life actually did to the human body back then, and it's the opposite of what you've been told. There's a story everyone's heard about why. It says ancient humans lived on the edge of starvation, long, brutal stretches of having nothing, broken by rare lucky kills, so their bodies learned to hoard fat against the next famine. But that picture turns out to be mostly a myth. When researchers actually studied the diets of hunter-gatherers, they found something surprising. Foragers generally didn't live in constant famine. They ate a huge variety of foods: roots, nuts, fruit, fish, small game, big game, dozens of different sources. So, if one failed, others didn't. And one study found that prehistoric hunter-gatherers actually ate more often, not less, than the farming societies that came after them. That's the first crack in the story. They weren't starving saints scraping by. Their food was often more reliable and more varied than what came next. And we don't have to guess about this, because a version of that life still exists, and scientists have studied it closely. In northern Tanzania live the Hadza, one of the last hunter-gatherer peoples on Earth, who still get their food the ancient way, hunting wild game, digging tubers, gathering berries, harvesting honey. A Hadza adult walks somewhere between 4 and 7 miles every single day. As one researcher put it, the Hadza get more activity in a day than a typical American gets in a week. And here's what their bodies look like. Obesity among them is almost non-existent. Heart disease and diabetes are nearly unheard of. Across more than 250 hunter-gatherer populations studied worldwide, the rate of obesity sits below 5%. These are lean, healthy, strong people well into old age. So far, this all seems to confirm the obvious. They move constantly, so of course they're lean. But here's where it gets strange, and where the real answer hides. Researchers measured exactly how many calories the Hadza burn in a day, tracking it precisely through their body chemistry. They expected the famously active Hadza to burn far more energy than a sedentary office worker. They didn't. Astonishingly, the Hadza burn about the same number of calories per day as the average Westerner. The body, it turns out, adapts. When you move more, it quietly spends less energy elsewhere, keeping the daily total roughly fixed. Sit with what that means. If the Hadza burn the same calories as us but almost never get fat, then their leanness can't be explained by all that walking. So what's left? The food. The Hadza simply don't take in as many calories because the food available to them, wild meat and plants and tubers, is filling, fibrous, and almost impossible to overeat. There is no engineered, calorie-dense, designed to be irresistible food anywhere in their world. The lead researcher put it bluntly: we're getting fat because we eat too much, not because we sit too much. That flips the whole picture. Ancient humans didn't stay lean because they were running marathons every day. They stayed lean because the only food on offer was food you physically couldn't overeat. Not willpower. The world itself simply didn't contain the path to obesity. So here's where the famous thrifty gene idea, the famine survival gene story, starts to fall apart. Because if that gene were real and as powerful as the story claims, it would have spread to absolutely everyone over millions of years. It would be fixed in the entire species. But it isn't. Humans vary enormously in how they store fat, which is exactly what you would not see if a single all-powerful famine gene had been ruthlessly selected for across all of human history. And there's a second problem. Famines mostly kill the very young and the very old, not adults in their prime. So a famine wouldn't actually select hard for fat-hoarding adults the way the story needs it to. So, scientists refined the idea, and the refinement is the whole answer. The intense, body-shaping famines, the real boom and bust of feast and starvation, may not be a deep ancient feature of human life at all. They mostly show up after one specific event: farming. When humans started farming around 12,000 years ago, they did something they'd never done before. They bet everything on a few crops. A whole village living off wheat or rice or corn. And when that single crop failed, a drought, a blight, a bad season, there was no backup. The varied forager menu was gone. Everyone went hungry at once. That's when real, regular, devastating famine enters the human story. Not in the Deep Stone Age, in the age of farms. Farming gave humans something else too. For the first time, a storable, starchy surplus. Grain you could pile up and eat endlessly. The first carbohydrates in bulk. And the human body, built over millions of years for lean meat and fiber and constant motion, suddenly met an environment it had never trained for. And this is the moment that matters for our question, because this is where getting fat first became possible. For the entire history of our species up to this point, no human could eat past what their body needed because the food simply wasn't there to do it. Farming changed that. For the first time, there was a surplus sitting in storage, day after day. The early farmers themselves didn't get fat. They still worked too hard and ate food too plain for that. But farming built the loaded gun. It created the surplus. And tens of thousands of years later, the modern world would pull the trigger. But it came at a cost nobody expects. We tend to assume farming was a step up, a stable food supply, the dawn of civilization, the start of everything good. The skeletons say the opposite. When archaeologists compare late hunter-gatherers to the early farmers who came right after them, they find that farming made people measurably worse off. Average height dropped by around 5 inches as humans switched from foraging to farming, a loss we didn't fully recover until the 20th century. Their bones show more anemia, more malnutrition, more disease, and in some places, shorter lives. And it wasn't a local fluke. The same grim pattern shows up in skeletons across Europe, the Americas, the Middle East, and Asia. The thing we picture as progress made the human body smaller and sicker, and at the very same time, quietly laid down the surplus that would one day let us grow fat. Now go back to those fat little statues, the Venus figurines, and the paradox we opened with: how did they carve a fat body in a world where almost no one was fat? How do you sculpt what you've never seen? Here's the answer, and it's the quiet, beautiful part of this whole story. They had never seen a fat person. Real obesity in their world essentially didn't exist. But they had seen one kind of human fullness, constantly, in every generation, in every group: pregnancy. A pregnant body is the one time a human being in that world became dramatically, visibly round, belly swelling, hips widening, the body filling out with the weight of new life. It was the only abundance the human form ever showed them. And look closely at the Venus figurines. Many of them don't just look fat, they look pregnant. The heavy belly, the full breasts, the wide hips, these are the shapes of fertility. So they didn't carve obesity. They couldn't. They'd never seen it. What they did was take the one form of human fullness they had seen, the pregnant body, swollen with life and survival, and they extended it. They extrapolated. They built a symbol of abundance out of the only abundance they knew. The Venus isn't a fat woman someone saw. It's the human body imagining plenty, starting from the one place plenty ever appeared. And there's a detail that clinches it. These figures are almost always women. If the carvings were really about fatness, about obesity, you would expect fat men too. But they barely exist, because the fullness being carved was never really about fat at all. It was about fertility, the one body that swells with life. And that tells you everything about how they saw it. To them, fullness wasn't shameful. It wasn't even ordinary. It was the body of life itself, fertility, survival, the reserves that carried you through the winter. In a world where you could never store much, a round body wasn't a problem. It was the dream, the thing that meant you would live. And that's the real shape of the truth. Your body's ability to store fat is ancient, and it is not a flaw. It is one of the most successful survival tools any animal ever evolved. The reserve that carries a living thing through the lean times. It kept your ancestors alive. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. What changed isn't your body. What changed is the world around it. For almost the entire human story, the only food that existed was food you couldn't overeat, wild, lean, filling, hard-won. Your body never needed a break on endless eating, because endless food didn't exist. Then, in a stretch of time so short it's barely a blink in evolutionary terms, first farming, then a modern world of processed, engineered, always available food, that ancient environment vanished, and the body, unchanged, was left running survival software for a world that no longer exists. So the honest answer to did ancient humans get fat is almost certainly not. Not because they had more willpower than you, not because they were starving survivors with a magic famine gene. They didn't get fat because the world they lived in made it nearly impossible, and the moment that world changed, so did we. You are not running a broken instinct. You are running a perfectly good body, shaped over millions of years, dropped without warning into a world it was never built for. The mismatch isn't a flaw in you. It's the speed of the change. The caveman starving by the fire, hoarding fat against the next famine, is a story. The truth is quieter and kinder. The body hasn't changed. Only the world did.